Welcome, fellow freaks, geeks, and nostalgic peeps, to my channel, Slime & Slashers, where, yeah, we talk about everything from Nickelodeon slime to horror movie slashers, but plenty of stuff in between. But mostly books. And today's video is another book-themed video. It is my recommendation video for Old School April, my readathon, watchathon, and activity-a-thon that I have created that will take place in April of 2024. I have tons of co-hosts. They will be linked below. Please subscribe to them all. And before we get into all the recommendations, first let's go to the short intro, and when we come back, we will get into all of the books. Welcome back, guys! I'm so excited to talk about some books that I have loved. So this specific recommendation video will be filled with books that I have read and can recommend, and then I'm also going to have another recommendation video, which is more of like a brainstorming video where I'm giving you possible books that you can read for the month of April and that would work for one or multiple reading prompts. Then I will have another video which will be my to-be watched list and movie and show recommendations. So all of that is to come, but this specific video, it's going to be filled with books that I have read. So those will be my recommendations for this one. I'm very excited. I'm going to break it into little parts, but a lot of these books will fit multiple prompts, which means you can rack up multiple points at once with one book. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the book recs, let me just quickly say that if you don't know about Old School April, I will link my announcement video below so you can learn more. It's very, very, very exciting that it's just around the corner, and I'm so hyped and pumped and stoked about April. I cannot wait. So without further ado, let's get into these recommendations so you can start thinking about what you will read, perhaps, in the month of April. So the first recommendation isn't a single book, but books by a specific author, in this case, Grady Hendrix. I love him. I think he is a great author to get people into horror if they're not into horror. By the way, you don't have to read horror to participate in Old School April. We've got prompts about fantasy, we've got prompts about romance. You can read any genre, and you can even mood read and participate. So very easy to participate no matter what genre you like. But specifically, I wanted to highlight Grady Hendrix because his books do have a retro flair, and he even wrote a nonfiction book about horror books from the 80s and 90s. They're called Paperbacks from Hell. That's what the book is called. So this is a wonderful nonfiction book, and it's my co-host Cameron's host recommendation. So you get an extra point for reading this because it's his rec, but also we have a prompt about a nonfiction book. It would fit for that. There's lots of prompts this could work for. I highly recommend it. I love this book so much. It opened up my eyes to a whole new world of books when I read this. Another host rec by Grady Hendrix, we have We Sold Our Souls. I read this last year for Old School April and adored it. It does not take place in the 90s, but it does have 90s vibes because we're following our main character who was in a band in the 90s. So very much nostalgic vibes. And there's a specific prompt that says that you can read books that are set in the 80s or 90s or books with a, quote, nostalgic vibe. And that is up to your interpretation. Even if you're reading something from, you know, let's say that's set in the early 2000s, that could be nostalgic to you and that would work. But this one worked for me last April. I really loved it, and it's Amy, my co-host, host recommendation, so you'd get an extra point for that too. Also, it features music. There's a prompt about that, so you'd get an extra point for that. It would work for lots of things. My favorite book by Grady Hendrix, after all the books I've read by him, is still My Best Friend's Exorcism, which was my first Grady Hendrix read, and it's near and dear to my heart. It's more than a horror book. It really, really examines friendships, specifically this one friendship at the core of the story between these two girls. It's got a lot of heart. In fact, the ending made me cry. I have read this book twice now and loved it both times. Highly recommend. This is actually set back in the 80s, so it definitely works for the time warp prompt, which says to, like I said, read a book set in the 80s or 90s or a book with a nostalgic vibe. This would have you covered there, plus a whole bunch of other prompts it would fit as well. And last but not least, you can read other Grady Hendrix books, but I just wanted to highlight these few. This one is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and it takes place in the 90s, so lots of 90s vibes. Again, it would fit for that time warp prompt, plus tons of others as well. Next up, I want to highlight my host recommendations one more time in case you missed my announcement video where I talked about my host recs and all of the other Readathon and Watchathon details. These are my 2 recs. I'll go into them in a second, but just a reminder that I'm going to have timestamps below. I'll have timestamps for when I talk about vintage books like this one, The Light at the End, which is one of my host recs. This was published back in the 80s, I believe. Let me double check. I just read this year and loved it. Yes, published back in 1986. This is The Light at the End, vampire book set in old school New York, grungy, gritty New York. It's captured perfectly within the pages. Really fast-paced vampire story, kind of a splatterpunk book. In fact, it's considered one of the first splatterpunk books because Skip and Spectre are the fathers of splatterpunk as a subgenre. And it's not the kind of splatterpunk that you read today. I think it's a little bit more tame and also more meaningful and impactful. I really like the way it's done in this book. And overall, I like how it's done back in the day. This one, though, it really knocks it out of the park with the execution, great language, but also it is pretty gory and fast-paced, so highly recommend. So if you want to see other vintage books, I'll have the timestamps below where I talk about more. And then I will have the timestamps for newer books, like my other host rec, Autumn Crow High, Fresh Hill by Cameron Chaney, who is a co-host. So you get an extra point if you read this book. Plus, it fits a whole bunch of other prompts, by the way. It fits Larger Than Life because it's over 300 pages. The paperback's 301 pages. It fits Time Warp because it's set back in the 90s. It fits Halfway to Halloween. It doesn't take place during Halloween, but it does have Halloween vibes, so I'm saying you can count it for that Halfway to Halloween prompt. Even though it specifically says take place at Halloween, it's got Halloween vibes, so I say that counts. Once Upon a Forest, because it's got coming-of-age vibes. Teen Witch, because it's got magical elements. The Goonies, because it is a YA book. So right away, what is that? Flippin' 6 points this could be, if in 7 because it's a host rec, so 7 points. And it's worth even more because it's over 300 pages, so actually you can get over flippin' 10 or 11 points from reading this book. Pretty awesome. I'd say it's worth it. And I'll have other newer books, the timestamps where I talk about those down below, which is going to start right now. Next up, I want to highlight one of my very favorite authors right now. She is fantastic. She publishes her own work. Really great writer. I jive with everything she writes. Not everybody I know has loved her books, but the majority of people who I know and have recommended her books to have enjoyed them, and that makes me really happy. So I want to continue to spread the words about her books, and they're literally... they are made for this event, it feels like. So, Tastes Like Candy, I want to talk about first because it's my favorite book by Ivy Tholen. That's the author I'm talking about here. The cover is fantastic. Let's just get that out of the way because look at this thing. You can't not mention it when you show it on camera. It's so incredible looking. This would fit so many prompts. As you could see, it's got neon on the cover. So that we've got a neon color prompt. Killer Clowns because this takes place at a carnival. Buffy because this was written by a woman author. Also, it would work for Breakfast Club prompt, which says to read a book with food on the cover because there's cotton candy on the cover here. Mighty Morphin Power Ranger, you could match this to the pink Power Ranger because pink is so prominent on this, including the back cover as well. So this book would definitely match the pink Power Ranger. Then also, there is a character who is a violinist, so music is a big part of this book and is discussed. So this would also work for the Say Anything prompt, which talks about reading a book that has to do with music or musical elements in the story. This would work for all of those. So although it's set in modern times, there are cell phones and such, this definitely has a nostalgic vibe in my opinion, but even if it didn't, it doesn't matter because it fits a whole bunch of other prompts. You don't have to read vintage books or even books with a nostalgic vibe if you don't want to. You could just read whatever you are looking forward to reading. But this would fit for so many different prompts, and I highly suggest Ivy Tholen. This is my favorite slasher book of all time. I can't say enough good things about it. The next book I want to highlight by her is Mallrats, which I actually read last Old School April and loved it. I gave it 4 stars. This takes place at a mall. It's a slasher. It does take place back in the 90s, so this would work for the Larger Than Life prompt, the Time Warp prompt that says to read a book set in the 90s or 80s or with a nostalgic vibe. It would also fit Mall of America because a mall is featured in the story. And also it would be Buffy again because again, Ivy Tholen, she's a woman author. So there you go. And I'm sure it could fit a lot more. I love this cover as well. And also this has neon on the cover too, so you could use the neon prompt. Here's a book I just read for Amy McCaw's YA book club. I enjoyed this. It wasn't perfect, however, it did have nostalgic vibes, but it does not take place in the 80s or 90s. It takes place modern times, modern teenagers we're following because this is YA, but it definitely has nostalgic references and it feels at least some parts of the book, feels very reminiscent of Buffy mixed with Babysitter's Club. I kind of wish this was set in the 90s. In fact, in Amy McCaw's book club live show, we talked about how we all wished this was just set back in the 90s because it would have really worked, in my opinion. But this could work for Buffy, Time Warp, Mall of America. Time Warp because it has nostalgic vibes, not because it's set in the past. Teen Witch, because it's got magical elements. We're following a coven, as you might be able to tell from the name of the book. Also, Halfway to Halloween, because this takes place, I believe, I should remember this, but I believe part of it takes place around Halloween time. I have to double check on that. You might want to double check on that, but this would work for a lot, and I overall really enjoyed it, and it's the first book in a series of books. Another one of my favorite authors, Catriona Ward, I've liked a lot of her books. This, I think, is my favorite book by her. This is Sundial, and you could definitely use this for the Neon prompt, as well as the Buffy prompt, because obviously Catriona Ward is a woman author, but you could probably make this work for a lot of other prompts too, and gain even more points, but I do want to recommend this just because it's an amazing book, period. Next up, Under the Blade by Matt Serafini. I wish more people talked about this book and read this book. This is a summer camp type of book, but it's really more about this girl who survives a Friday the 13th-esque massacre, and fast forward like 20 some odd years later, she's a fully fledged adult, but decides to go back to the location, the summer camp, where she lived through this traumatic ordeal because she wants to write a book about it. She's not doing this for, shits and giggles, pardon my French. She's doing this because her job is in danger and she feels like writing a book will help her in her current job. And so there's a whole bunch of reasons behind that. It starts a little slow, but it really, really goes to some interesting places. It's a unique slasher. I think you should pick it up. Also, so this would work for multiple prompts, but you could match this to the Red Ranger if you try to do the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger prompt where you can match a book to a ranger. This one would totally work. It's completely red, so it would work for the Red Ranger. Also, it would fit larger than life because it's over 300 pages, so you get extra amount of points for that. And also, it has a nostalgic vibe because there is a flashback right at the beginning of the book. And I think that would probably have taken place in the 90s or so. So Time Warp would also work for this. It would fit lots of prompts. I really do think people should check out this book if you like slashers. Here we have a brand spanking new 2023 release, so just less than a year old, Maeve Fly. Not everyone likes this. We're following one person. We're in Maeve's head for the entire book. It definitely has American Psycho vibes, but I think it's a lot more entertaining than American Psycho, at least the movie. I've heard it's also more entertaining than the book because I know people who have read the book and said the same thing about this versus that book. Also, this would work for a number of our prompts, including Halfway to Halloween, because part of this book does take place around Halloween. Tiny Toons, because we've got an unhinged main character, aka Maeve. We also have Scooby-Doo, Man is the Real Monster. Freddy's Nightmares, a book that could give you nightmares. This one could definitely give you nightmares. Buffy, because it's written by a woman author. So this would work and fit a lot of prompts, get you a lot of points. Next up, one of my favorite horror comedy books. It's really more comedy leaning than horror leaning. It's such a fun time. I love this book so much. I actually recently recommended this to my friend Lexi from Books with Lexi, and she really had a good time with it. She enjoyed it very much, and that made me very happy. This takes place at a haunted house where these clowns have to work, and they don't want to work there because they want to be nice clowns. They don't want to be scary clowns in a haunted house, but they're forced to be. This would fit for the Killer Clowns prompt. It would also fit for the Free Willy Animal Attack prompt because, as the title suggests, yes, the clowns do face off against some spiders, so there is an animal attack element, but lots of humor. You can't really take this 100% seriously, so if you do like comedy in your books sometimes, this one could be a great pick for you. Next up, we have a YA romance, and I was actually sent this book by the author Lily Sparks, and I was blown away by how much I liked this. I read this book and the second book. I still have to read the third book. It's a series. This is Teen Killers Club, and there is a romance element to this, so that might not be for everybody. I actually think this was really good for a YA. I'm very picky about YA, but I love this one. This definitely has neon colors on the cover, so it would work for that. But also, when Lily Sparks emailed me to pitch sending me this book, she called it Christopher Pike-esque, and I could totally see that. That definitely is apparent when you read the book, that it's got some Christopher Pike vibes with the teenagers, with the teenagers going through drama and also having to face really high stakes. So essentially, we've got this girl. She is sent to prison. We think she's innocent. We don't know though, but from her perspective, it seems like she's innocent. And then her and some other prisoners are actually sent to this faraway camp where it's a teen killers club. So they get out of the prison, but they're kind of put in a different kind of prison in a way. They're forced to train to be able to assassinate people. And more develops from there. Like I said, a romance is a big part of this, but I had such a fun time with this. I don't know why I love this so much, but I never talk about it, and I wanted to highlight it here because I think it would really be very appropriate for old school April. It just screams nostalgia, even though it's set in more modern times. Here we have sci-fi-esque type of books. Here we've got Night of the Living Trekkies, which is more of like a general fiction comedy book with some zombies thrown in, so there is some horror and some gore, but this had everything. It had emotion, it had heart, had great characters, it had a unique setting, it had so much. It even had humor. So I loved this. And if you like Star Trek, or even if you don't, I think you should pick it up because you could totally follow along even if you have no interest in Star Trek. But if you do like Star Trek, this could be very nostalgic for you and could really give you those nostalgic vibes even though it's set in more modern times. And then a more actually nostalgic book. This is Star Trek: The Next Generation Resistance. We are actually following Captain Picard, and he does kind of have to deal with the Borg yet again. And so this takes place, of course, after the events of certain Star Trek movies. So I enjoyed this very much, and it would totally work because we do have sci-fi related prompts, and this is also nostalgic because Star Trek TNG is a nostalgic show and an old school show. Here we have more clown themed books that would fit for the Killer Clowns prompt, and I'm sure a number of other prompts as well. We've got Cotton Candy Massacre, which I just read last year and adored. This was so fun. I think this would be more universally liked than this one that I'm holding up, Clown Flesh by Tim Curran. This one's super gory and disgusting, but also the horror, it really packs a punch. It goes there. There's some humor in it, but it's really more about, oh, it's splattery, it's crazy, it's wild. I think it could have been a little bit shorter so it wasn't an absolutely perfect read. However, I did enjoy my time reading it. It does take place in the wintertime, so if you're a seasonal reader, beware of that. It's more cold, wintry, but it definitely has a lot of clowns, and they're really horrible, creepy clowns. This one has a little bit more humor, that's why I think it would work for more people, and it just has a very interesting plot. It's got interesting characters, in my opinion. Their characters don't work for everybody, but they really worked for me. I connected with them. We are following teenagers, so be aware of that, but this is an adult book. There is some gore in this too, but I just think overall it's a very well-rounded novel and would work for more people than this one would, per se. So those are two more clown wrecks. Alright, some slasher books. Some of these have nostalgic vibes, some are just like good reads that I would suggest that you could make work for a number of other prompts that have nothing to do with nostalgia. We've got Bone Saw by Patrick Lacey. Isn't it cute that it looks like this? I love it. I really enjoyed this quite a bit when I read it. Then we've got Curse of the Reaper, another slasher book, like I said. This definitely packs a punch. I love the audiobook. If you're into well-done audiobooks, this one has a really great audiobook. And it also has a lot of movie references, but it's references to like a fake movie universe that it exists within this novel, but it works so well, and it's very reminiscent of slasher movie tropes because it's got a lot of those in here and really well done, but it also has emotion because there's characters in here that are struggling with like real life things that are tough to deal with. So I really appreciated this for the depth, but also for the great slashing. It had a lot of wonderful elements. This is more of just a pure fun slasher, so that's the difference between these two, but both would be appropriate and fun to read at any time of year, but also specifically you could pick them up for old school April. Another book that would work for the Killer Clowns prompt because it takes place at a carnival, features clowns. It could probably fit other prompts as well. This is The Pilo Family Circus by Will Elliott. I want to shout it out because no one talks about it. It's very weird. There's a lot of cursing in it. Beware if you don't like that in your books. There are some horror, like more violence leaning things in this book, but just general violence. I thought it was an interesting premise though. Look it up if it sounds intriguing. I'm going to start going through a lot of these in more rapid pace. If any of them sound good, just know that I enjoyed it or it wouldn't be on this rec list, and I do recommend it, and if you want more info, it'd be helpful if you look it up on Goodreads. Somebody who I think really captures the vibe of horror movies very well is Adam Caesar. He's a wonderful author. Lots of people talk about Clown in a Cornfield, but I actually like Video Night much better. I think Video Night is a lot of fun, and it actually has tons of 80s references. I can't remember if it takes place in the 80s or if it just references the 80s a lot, but we've got VHS tapes featured in here, and it's got aliens in here as well, so it's definitely an alien type of horror story. Really well done. There are obnoxious characters, be warned. One of the guys is super cringy and annoying. I don't like this guy character, but he's like that for a reason. The action, though, is wonderful, and I think if you like horror movies, I feel like Adam Caesar's a really good author to check out because he just captures that vibe, as I said before, so well. The other author who captures horror movie vibes to perfection is David Sodergren. His books read so fast, it's like a movie on the page. It's wacky that he's able to do that. I don't know how. It's crazy. So we've got 2 David Sodergren books here. We've got Dead Girl Blues, which I gave 5 stars, and Satan's Burnouts Must Die, which I also gave 5 stars. These are extreme in a way. There's like a lot of violence. This one's very sad, very bleak. Same here. Lots of violence in this book, specifically SA. Check your trigger warnings if you're sensitive to that type of thing. But if you're looking for something that reads like a horror movie, these would do you fine. And this one has a nostalgic flair because it looks like one of the old Italian giallo movie posters, but it's a book. So yes, if you like kind of slasher-esque books, this one is kind of like a noir slasher. David Sodergren has described it like. This one, I say the violence like is amped up to the 13th degree. It doesn't even sound like it's a real phrase, but that's how I would describe this one. Another slasher with wonderful old school vibes. We've got Escape from Happydale. It's the first book of a series, and it's so good. We're following this girl who survives a massacre, and she's trying to rid the world of these boogeymen, essentially, bad guys, slashers. So she goes with her chainsaw and tries to, like, save other girls and make basically other girls survive. So she's a final girl and she wants to create more final girls. So she was trained to do this by a final girl who found and helped her, and so the line continues. She's a final girl trying to help other potential final girls. I love the concept. I had such a good time, and if you like slashers, this one is one of the best in my opinion. A 2023 release that definitely has weird vibes, so if you don't like weird books, you might not like this. I freaking love this book, gave it 5 stars. This is set back in the 90s, so of course it would work for Time Warp because it's a modern book set back in the 90s. Check that off the list. Plus, it could probably fit for a lot of other things, but it's just a good overall book. If you're a romance fan, I freaking adored this one. It had heart, it had well-developed characters, interesting premise, also some magical realism in it, and I loved it. Our main character can see ghosts, and she thinks she's falling for a potential ghost. And yeah, I don't like romance too much, but this one I freaking loved. And if you like movie novelizations, there's a brand new one out by Megan Shepherd, and it's the Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas novelization. The audiobook is fantastic. It goes a little hardcore at some points, maybe a little too much for some people, but I loved the voice acting in the audiobook, and I thought it was so well done, and it gave you a little extra glimpse into the psyches of the characters from the movie. Another recent coming-of-age book that was released in the last, I guess, 10 or so years, December Park by Ronald Malfi. I really enjoyed that one. Another coming of age, but that focuses on a group of girls, but it's set back in the 80s, is We Ride Upon Sticks. It also has a neon cover. That one would really be a great read. I read it last year. Slewfoot would be a good read because it deals with witchcraft, and it's so well written. That's by Brom. Here we have Schrader's Chord by Scott Leeds. Definite, like, vintage horror feeling book, but it was just published last year by Tor Nightfire. It does take place around Christmas, but that doesn't knock you over the head with, like, the seasonal vibes. You could read this any time of year. I really, really like it. Essentially, this family has to come together after the father passes away, and he leaves these series of records warning the kids not to play the records. What do? They play the records and shit goes to hell. It's like it opens the door to hell, perhaps. You have to read it and see, but it is a chunker, so it definitely would fit the larger-than-life prompt and also the say anything prompt because music is a big part of this book, but it could probably fit a lot more prompts as well. This one was a lot of fun, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. Some more YA, and specifically vampire-themed YA. Here we have Mina and the Undead, and this is actually the host pick for my friend and co-host, Christine. And she actually said that you could read any book in the series, because if you've already read Mina and the Undead, there's a second book out, Mina and the Slayers, and the third book is coming out in April. Perfect timing. You could read any of those 3, depending on where you are in the series, and it would count as a host rec, and you'd get that extra point for that. But also, it's got vampires in the story, so it fit the Monster Squad prompt. It takes place back in the 90s, so it would fit the Time Warp prompt. It works for a lot of different prompts, and it's just a good story. I think it's dark for YA, but it also has a lightness to it. It's set in my hometown of New Orleans, and it captures New Orleans very, very well. So I highly recommend this. And Amy McCaw, the author of this, is such a great and wonderful person. And isn't it just the cherry on top of the cake if you can support a really nice person, but their book rocks too, so it's like a double whammy in a good way. So yes, check it out. And here we've got a Buffy themed book set in the Buffy universe years after the final episode takes place. This is officially like within the universe. We're following Willow's child. Yes, she has a child now, and it seems like she might be the new Slayer. So there's a new group of Scoobies, and it's just so well written. I have got to get to the second book in this series because there are more books out right now, but I've only read this one, but this was a 5-star for me. So what am I waiting for? April would be the perfect time because Buffy's such a 90s nostalgic show, and these are newer books, but it brings you back to that universe and definitely feels like it honors that universe. We do have a mini-me / short circuit prompt, which is read a novella or short story. So I wanted to feature some novellas that I loved quickly. So first up, Scan Lines by Todd Kessling. This one has old technology in the story. It's got nostalgic vibes, even though it's set in more modern times. It also, like I said, would fit for mini-me. All these books would. It's also Spellmaster. You could use the word scan lines as a nostalgic word if you want, so that would work. It was a 5-star read for me last April. Next up, we've got a coming-of-age book of Foster Home and Flies. This one, so powerful, so sad, so touching. I really like this. It's a coming-of-age book that takes place over about a week or a weekend, so it's more condensed. Most coming-of-age stories, they take place over a year or more. This one, much shorter time period, but still packs a punch. Here is Goddess of Filth by V. Castro, and this one would also work for the Teen Witch prompt. The Teen Witch prompt talks about books that involve magic. Well, I'm saying that possession and like Ouija stuff can relate to any kind of magic or anything like that, because to me, like, possession in a way is a form of kind of black magic, darker stuff, dark magic. It's not magic per se, it also has to do with religion, but if you want to stretch that prompt and count it for Teen Witch, you can. Here is a book you could read that is super weird, so if you like weird, maybe check it out. It is so strange. I can't even really describe what it's about. There are dinosaur skulls, there are catering parties, a dude with a sheet over his head who eats in a very disgusting and weird way, biker gangs, and also I didn't even remember this, but it takes place in the 80s, so it's got that going for it. Also, you could use it for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers prompt, because this could match Jason, because on the cover there is a T-Rex, and that is Jason's dinosaur that he wore on his outfit, or his, I guess, uniform? What do they call them? Suits? Yes, suits. I don't know. Anyway, also this would work for the prompt Breakfast Club because the main character is a caterer at a catering company, so food is involved in the plot quite a bit. Another weird novella, but this one is so much fun. It definitely packs a punch. It references Pretty in Pink. It references old school professional wrestling, so definitely the nostalgic vibes are there. This is The Despicable Fantasies of Quentin Serkinoff. It's hard to say. There is a dual timeline. You get flashbacks to 1995, but also 2002. Essentially, the main character may or may not be morphing into a dinosaur. You have to read it to find out. If you like cryptids, cryptids would work for our Monster Squad prompt about reading a book featuring any kind of monster. I love Mothman, that's probably my favorite cryptid. So this is Below by Laurel Hightower. You could also count this for Fern Gully because nature plays a big role in the story. A woman gets stranded outside in like this terrible blizzard, so that counts for that. And it's such a good book. It also has some feminist vibes, I think, in my opinion. So definitely recommend. Super short, one of the shortest novellas I'm including, but this one has such powerful grief depicted in the story. This is Blanky by Keelan Patrick Burke, and I just think it's a great novella if you just want to check out a short book for the readathon. Here we have Jedi Summer by John Bowden. This is actually a nostalgia-themed novella, so it's not just a random one like Blanky per se. Blanky doesn't really have anything to do with nostalgia per se, but it's just a great book. This one's a great book, but it also has to do with nostalgia. So it's set back in the summer of 1983, and it's written in a very almost non-linear way, like little stories taking place throughout 1983 in that summer. I really enjoyed this quite a bit. Very unique for a coming-of-age book. Also, The Roo by Alan Baxter is a new book, but it's definitely written like a vintage 80s style animal attack book. Of course, the name kind of suggests that we're following a killer kangaroo. So yes, The Roo, I had a blast with it. Short, sweet. I don't know if it would be for everybody, but I liked it. Last but not least, in terms of novellas, we've got Werecage, and this is about a werewolf-themed Nicolas Cage, so it would work for the Monster Squad prompt because it does feature a monster of sorts, a monster Nicolas Cage. There is like a chihuahua-sized dog version of Nicolas Cage in this. This was so zany, but I had such a good time. If you are okay with not taking your stories completely seriously, you might like this. Magic may or may not be involved. There's a lot of fun stuff going on. I really like this. And if you like Nicolas Cage, there's a lot of Nicolas Cage movie quotes in this too. And last but not least, for the more modern books, let's go over some modern middle grade. Kind of in the Goosebumps vein, but more modern. Spine Shivers, The Grin in the Dark, features clowns, so it would work for killer clowns. Really creepy for a middle grade book. If you want something that takes place around Halloween time and also features a carnival, here we've got Carnival. So cute. Powerful messages about family, but also I really enjoyed the horror and the setting was wonderful too. So this one's awesome. This is by J.H. Reynolds, and it's part of the Monster Street series, which are all fantastic. There's also another book that takes place during Halloween in this series called The Halloweeners. So both of those would work for Halfway to Halloween, but this one would also work for Killer Clowns and Halfway to Halloween. Here we've got a wonderful middle grade book by Robbie Miles, who is a fantastic author. You can find him on Instagram. This is super Goosebumps-esque, but it deals with modern technology. A kid is dealing with frightening things happening with his cell phone, and I thought this was wonderful. I freaking loved it. And a cryptid-themed middle grade book, Mothman's Curse. This had a wonderful mystery at the core of the story. I love the characters. Highly recommend if you like middle grade. Now on to vintage books, and I do want to remind you guys, we have merch available, designed by my friend Rachel, over at Odd Monster Co. on Instagram. I will link the merch store down below. It's all in her Etsy store. So just want to remind you, I got the orange shirt. It's kind of like a Nickelodeon orange color. It's so awesome. The first book I want to highlight is a longer book, but it is my favorite book of all time. It is a coming-of-age book, Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. If you just love well-written books and don't mind a lot of characters and kind of a longer, drawn-out story, but it all comes together, I suggest Boy's Life. Another carnival-themed book. This is about a family who runs their own traveling carnival, and the mom and dad, the head of the family, decide to breed their own freaks to ensure the longevity of their carnival. I feel like I've said this so many times, so I have it like memorized. This is a hard-to-read book. There are things that are disturbing because the idea of a set of parents doing that, like purposely trying to have kids to put in a freak show, is just so off-putting and so wrong in so many ways. This would work for larger than life, like I said, Killer Clowns because of the carnival, also Scooby-Doo because, you know, man's messed up, man's a monster, because people are doing the bad things in here. There's a great mystery at the center of this. It's not for everybody, but if you like a really well-written carnival-themed story with disturbing elements, to say the least, then I would say check it out. Another possession-themed book, here we have The Exorcist. I would say that you could count this for Monster Squad as well, because to me, a demon is a type of monster. I think that works just fine. And this is just one of my favorite vintage books of all time. It's so well written. Lots of people recently read this and also watched the movie and really liked it. I know Lauren loved the book from Happy Haunts Library. She did a read-along of this not that long ago, so check it out if you're interested, but it is scary, so beware. I think it's actually very scary. If you like a good cozy mystery, this one's a lot of fun. This is Book to Die by John Dunning, a vintage mystery book. I just read this year and loved it. There is an audiobook available, so you don't have to have a vintage copy, luckily. If you like short story collections, you can't go wrong with The Books of Blood by Clive Barker. I just read volume 1 and it blew me away. Pretty much the greatest short stories I've ever read, ever. Really impactful, really disturbing and dark, just so well written though, overall. If you like vampire stories, this one's really fun. This is a vintage book, but it has been reprinted as part of the Paperbacks from Hell line by Valancourt Books. This is Nightblood by T. Chris Martindale. It's kind of like Rambo plus vampires. That's all you need to know. It's a good time. Again, another weird book. If you like weird, this one might work for you. The Cipher by Kathy Koja. There is an audiobook of this as well. It is bleak and dark and gritty, but it is good. It's not for everybody though, because the writing style is kind of hard to get into, but I really enjoyed it, and I know a lot of friends of mine who have enjoyed it too. If you are looking for more zany, crazy, wild type of vintage books, I do have a list of top 20 trashiest paperback from hell reads, and I'm going to link that video below. So all the books I'm talking about, or almost all books except one, they're not on that list. So these are other more serious paperback from hell books, unless I mention otherwise, but most of these are not featured in that video. So for more, specifically, paperback from hell suggestions from me, go check out that video linked below if you haven't seen it already. It's one of my favorite videos I've made, and I worked really hard on that one. Next up, not an animal attack book, but a book featuring an animal companion, and he's the most lovable, freaking good boy animal companion ever. Thor by Wayne Smith. Thor is the name of the dog from the book, and of course that's the title of the book itself. It's wonderful. It's kind of a werewolf type of story. Highly recommend. It'll pull on your heartstrings. You'll hate a certain character for a while because he's not super nice to Thor, but Thor, I love you, Thor. He's such a good boy. And the book, it's just, I'm so glad I read it. I think it's a great paperback from hell that not a lot of people talk about. Alright, and the only book I'm going to highlight that is on my top 20 trashiest books list is Nelf's, because I have to shout it out here. If you're going to take one of my paperback from hell suggestions, let it be this one. There is a new Kindle edition available now. There's also an audiobook available now, and there's a new paperback version with the original cover art, which is this, available now. I highly recommend Nelf's if you like a zany good time. Not for everyone, as I said about some of these books, or a lot of these books, but I think the majority of people would have a good time with it. I'd like to shout out my favorite Christopher Pike book, in case you want to read a Christopher Pike. My favorite is Monster. I thought that one was super gruesome, super dark for a YA, and of course it's vintage YA, so it's a lot of fun. Next up, I also wanted to highlight some Goosebumps. My two favorite Goosebumps books, they are The Haunted Mask and also Welcome to Dead House. The Haunted Mask would work for halfway to Halloween because the majority of the story does take place on Halloween, so that would work perfectly. And now I'd like to shout out a point horror book that I really like, The Babysitter by R.L. Stine. I think that one's fantastic. It's a little series of books. Really, you can't go wrong with any point horror or Fear Street book. I wish I would have more to recommend to you, but I haven't read all that many, and I've got to change that. I've got to keep reading more and more so I could have a recommendation video of all my favorites. But as of now, I can definitely say I love The Babysitter. And last but not least, a YA vintage animal attack book that's super gory, almost as gory as any adult animal attack book I've read. It's The Rats by Paul Zindel. If you could find a copy, I suggest that one. It's short, it's quick, and it packs a punch. For being for younger readers, I was very surprised by the content in a good way. Next up, a couple of random suggestions, including nonfiction, and then some things that are not regular books, like magazines, comic books, graphic novels. First, let's start with the nonfiction. One of my favorite nonfiction books of all time, and one of my favorite books, period, The Chris Farley Show. This is written in interview style. It's got interview snippets from all kinds of people throughout Chris Farley's life, just talking about his life from childhood to adulthood, till his time with SNL, through his time starring in movies. Sad, hilarious, emotional, and informative. So I can't recommend this highly enough. There's also a movie, but the book's way better. Like, the movie's documentary style, but this, it's just better, I think, in book format. I really loved this. Another one of my favorite nonfiction books / favorite books of all time, Inside Pee-wee's Playhouse. I'm a huge fan of Pee-wee in general, but specifically Pee-wee's Playhouse, the TV show from the 80s. This brings you behind the scenes, and it does say it's unauthorized, but there's a lot of great information from people who worked on the show. There's a lot of great information about the art style of the show, wonderful photographs included. So if you are a Pee-wee buff and haven't read this, I do suggest it. I read it years ago, and I really am due for a reread, but if you like 80s culture in general, I think you could like this too. You could also read comic books for certain things. You could count that as a picture book. One of the prompts for Muppet Babies says that. So this is a Justice League / Power Rangers crossover, which is super nostalgic because of the Power Rangers. There's also generally just a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comic line. And also, there are Rugrats and Nickelodeon comics. There's also Rocko's Modern Life comics. I read one last year called Rocko's Modern Afterlife and loved it, so I do suggest that one. But if you could get your hands on any of them, you can't go wrong. Again, any Goosebumps, any kind of vintage stuff like that, you can't go wrong. But if you're looking for new stuff, I gave you a whole bunch of things to think about as recommendations. So I hope I have something here in this video for everyone. Hopefully it's not all books that you've heard about a million times before. I'm I'm hoping there's some fresh things for you, but these are some of my favorites, and I just wanted to give them a shout out if you're looking for things that will match at least one, if not many more, prompts. What are you planning on reading? Do any of these books speak to you? If so, which ones? Let me know down in the comments below. Love interacting with you guys. Thanks again for watching. For this time, that is it for me. Till next time, you guys know what you can do. Keep on killing it and kick it old school. Bye, guys.